Hi, welcome back. Today I'm going to review the Niu KQI3 Pro electric scooter, and I'll do a comparison with its predecessor, the KQI2 Pro and Hiboy KS4 Pro. I'll also let you watch a thorough range test on varied terrain in an average neighborhood. But first, I want to personally thank all of you who subscribe to my channel. We've reached a very modest milestone of 200 subscribers, so I want to thank you for your support. I hope you'll continue to click subscribe and help me grow this channel so that I can continue to bring you more in-depth, brutally honest product reviews. Okay, so let's get started. I'm going to spare you an overview of the features, as all the review videos seem to sound more like an advertisement than an honest review. YouTube reviewers don't seem to want to say anything negative about new scooters, and if they do offer criticism, it's rather timid. However, this is essentially an $800 electric vehicle, so I'm going to tell you exactly what you need to know about all three aforementioned models to help you make a good purchase decision. Also, there are some significant negatives about this scooter that you really should know about, but before I get into that, let me give you a real-world idea of the battery, power, durability, comfort, and performance of this scooter. We'll get into the purchase considerations and comparisons later. One important thing you need to know real quick is how mileage and speed are displayed. The ride tracking in the app overestimates the average mile by about 1/8. What this means is there are about 5,280 feet in a mile, so whatever distance it calculates is about 500 to 700 feet further than what you actually go. Likewise, the speedometer displays about 1 to 1.5 miles per hour above your actual speed. I've used a few different apps, including Google Maps, to verify speed and distance, and they were all similar except for the new app. However, this overestimation is common, apparently, among all scooter apps, in my experience. By the way, I'm a pretty lean 186 pounds, so it's a fair load to carry on one of these vehicles. Now, I'll tell you very honestly about the battery life. I've run the route for this range test a few times, averaging about 11 miles. I've run another range test of flatter terrain, but with a lot of bigger and steeper hills, and averaged about 15 miles each trip. On the 10-mile route, which really puts a scooter like this to the test, it eats about 40 to 45% of the battery on average. On the 15-mile range test, it eats up about 60 to 65% of the battery. In my longest range test, I made it about 18 miles with 21% battery remaining. The truth is, it's pretty far from the advertised 31-mile range. You should also know the battery isn't always consistent. One day I took it out in almost the exact weather conditions of previous rides, but the battery seemed to drain much quicker that day. Therefore, if you plan to take this scooter for commuting, you probably need to stay within 15 or 16 miles in order to make it back home without having to walk the scooter. Okay, let's discuss its motor power. The KQI3 Pro is rated between 350 to 700 watts of power at 48 volts. And I must say, this scooter has some pretty impressive torque. Now, the KQI2 Pro I had prior to this one struggled on smaller hills or in grass or gravel. However, it had such an impressive initial acceleration that I can make really sharp 90-degree turns on sidewalks that I can't quite make as fast with the KQI3 Pro. You'll start to notice a slight loss of torque around 80% battery life. Then as you get to about 50%, you'll gradually lose 1 to 2 to 3 miles per hour of speed. Around 30%, you'll start to struggle up steeper hills and max out around 17 miles an hour, 16 miles an hour. There's a much sharper loss of power and speed once you get down to around 10 or 15% or so, but it'll still take you that last mile. The Hiboy KS4 Pro, in comparison, though powered by 36 volts, has a slightly better overall acceleration to maximum speed. And though it tops at 19 miles per hour, while the KQI3 Pro goes 20 miles an hour, the KS4 Pro seems like it's actually going 19 miles an hour and not just displaying it. So let's talk about the brakes. And here's where I start introducing some of the flaws of this scooter. First, the braking is quite effective. Much better than the KQI2 Pro. A little better than the Hiboy KS4 Pro. Now, I don't know a whole lot about the regenerative braking, but it's almost a gimmick in my experience because it seems to serve more function as a sort of an automatic electronic brake than to actually do much for the battery life. In fact, I used to run it on the weakest setting for a while, then switched to maximum, and there's no noticeable difference in battery life. On the contrary, I'd say it actually works best to set it at medium. And high setting seems to drain the battery faster actually. And this could be because every time you let off the accelerator, it slows down so drastically that you have to spend more energy returning back to speed. Now, there's a design flaw in the disc brakes that I'll mention. One day while riding on a sidewalk, I swerved a bit to avoid a tree branch and went slightly off the sidewalk. Now the brake discs are exposed, so it caught the edge of the sidewalk and ended up scratching the edge of the disc a bit. I was able to gently file the disc a bit and take off the scratches so that it wouldn't make noise when I used the brakes. But it would be a lot better, it would be much better designed if part of the frame extended to the bottom of the disc or something, so that way you can't just hit the disc brake with any object or going over something. Now, another time I ran over a little pine cone. I kind of partially ran over it, and a little piece of it got lodged in the calipers and it caused it to make noise when I used the brakes. Not a big deal, easy to remove, but because the the brake discs are totally exposed, I just don't really like that. Now, let's discuss an almost fatal flaw, and another one of the biggest problems with the scooter also. First, while Niu bills the tires as a selling point, in reality they're a total weakness. See, I had a KQI3 Pro prior to this one, but on the same day I got it, just going around the block of my neighborhood, the back tire lost air and would not air back up. I tried every which way to try and air it back up, it wouldn't hold air. So here I ran into another major problem, customer service. I called Niu, and they sort of took my call as if they were responsive and all that, but they seemed a lot more interested in scrutinizing the problem than fixing it. Their solution, after all, ended up being, after their team meeting to discuss the issue, was to ship the whole thing back via UPS rather than sending me a replacement tire. But since I got it on Amazon, I just exchanged it for another one. In retrospect, I regret getting the Niu. I really wanted to get the Yadia, I don't know how you pronounce it, the KS5 Pro, but it was $100 cheaper or so for the KQI3 Pro, and in retrospect, I would have paid that $100. It would have been worth it, I think, for the KS5 Pro from Yadia. Anyway, so the deal with the tires is they aren't puncture resistant, and since they don't have an inner tube, there's nothing you can do to air it back up once it goes flat. You just have to replace the tire. Now, the new one I got, that I exchanged for the Niu KQI3 I got, it came with a flat front tire. And I was able to air it back up, but it loses half its air after a day or two. So I air it up every time before each ride, but it's something I need to get Niu to fix. And considering how their service was the first time, I'm really not looking forward to the hassle and delay of trying to get it fixed. Now, the third major problem with this scooter is it has no suspension. Therefore, given that it has pneumatic tires, you have to really baby it, or you'll end up needing to replace the tire, and that's a big hassle that'll keep you from using the scooter for a week or two. Just a quick comparison with the Hiboy KS4 Pro, which has solid tires and a rear suspension. The air-filled tires do absorb shock enough to make it a smoother ride than the KS4 Pro. Now, that's an excellent scooter, but a really bumpy ride. Anyway, having no suspension and tires without any inner tubes or puncture resistance, you really have to be careful of everything you run over. I think if you hit a slightly uneven sidewalk crack, there's a very good chance you'll blow the tire and be out of commission. Now, if you were to set the KQI3 Pro custom mode to say 16 or 17 miles an hour, I think you could probably squeeze out about 20 to 21 miles of range, as opposed to, 15 or 16 miles at full speed. So anyway, a few other things. The reflectors are rather flimsy, and I've accidentally bent it a couple of times, when putting the scooter in my car or taking it out. And it seems kind of like a soda can where if you bend the tab back and forth enough, it'll eventually snap off. But like I said, you pretty much have to baby the scooter anyway. So now one great thing about the scooter, that something I really hated about the Hiboy KS4 Pro, is that you can connect your phone to it in the app while it's charging. You cannot do that with the Hiboy. This feature comes in pretty handy because you can just use your phone to check and see how far it's come along charging. With the Hiboy, you'd have to unplug the charger, turn the scooter on, then connect to the app and see where you're at charging. So, I really hated that about the Hiboy, though it's such a good scooter. But that and the rough ride, those are major considerations. So overall, if you are very careful what you run over, cognizant of where you're going, and you really baby the scooter, I think it's very good. It has a good torque, a really good torque, and it's got a pretty good speed and a pretty good range. It's not real expensive, though I think for $800, some of the things I mentioned could be greatly improved. I really hate the tires. Now, I've used other scooters with pneumatic tires that have inner tubes, and even if you puncture the tire, as long as it's not a big puncture, you can pretty much just patch it and put another inner tube in there, and these tires, once you hit a bump or something and having no suspension, it really does hit the tires very hard. And I also would expect that it would also put some stress on the rims. And if you hit a speed bump or something hard enough, I wonder if you could bend the rims. I don't know, but not having a suspension is a big minus with air-filled tires. But it does have a smoother ride than the KS4 Pro, so it's not a bad scooter. I think it's a little overhyped, and no one ever wants to say anything wrong, bad about Niu. But like I said, I'll tell you the brutal truth here. Now, compared to the KQI3 Pro, which I found to be a really good, fun scooter to ride around. It was very useful because I use it for work, but it maxed out 17 miles an hour, which is pretty good, but not, that 3 miles an hour is a pretty big difference in speed. The battery did last, it seemed to have a little bit better range than the KQI3 Pro, and also it did have a little bit more initial takeoff acceleration, so I could really cut corners with that KQI2 Pro, really sharp corners and fast, just kind of whoosh right around, whereas the KQI3 Pro has just a very slight delay, although it has a good takeoff, just a very slight delay compared to the KQI2, which I can't quite cut 90-degree turns as sharply as I could. But now I've gotten used to it, it works pretty well. But if you don't really have to worry about hills or anything, and you don't need much power, the KQI2 Pro is a really good scooter, considering that you can get it for $200 or $300 less than the KQI3 Pro. However, I got to say I'm pretty impressed with the power, considering it's 350 volts, maximum 700, but it runs at 350 watts, maximum 700, but it runs at 48 volts. Now that I think is a big factor. The Hiboy KS4 Pro, for example, has a 500 watt motor, but at 36 volts. And as far as I could tell, it helps a little bit with the range, not a whole lot, but it definitely gives it a lot more torque, a lot more power to go up hills and over grass and things like that. So, you know, you're going to have a little more power for sure with the KQI3 Pro than the KS4 Pro from Hiboy. Now, that's pretty much all I have to tell you about it for now. I've got a nice scenic range test that I want to upload here soon. But for now, I'll leave you with the rest of this little range test so you can see what it's like. And keep in mind, I had the GoPro on a chest strap, so when you see the shaking and the bumpiness, that's pretty much what the ride's actually like. It's, like I said, it's not a real bumpy and rough ride like the Hiboy KS4 Pro. It is considerably smoother, but you know, not having the suspension is a major factor. So, like I said, I really appreciate those of you who have subscribed. I hope you will click subscribe and help me grow this channel. I'll continue to bring you good, in-depth, and brutally honest product reviews. Anyway, thanks for watching. Make sure you give it a like, and we'll catch you on the next one.